Cosmic time is the same for everyone, but human time differs with each person. Time flows in the same way for all human beings. Every human being flows through time in a different way.
You're in for a treat. In this conversation, I enter dialogue with Eddie Harran, who studies chronosophy and goes by his alter ego, Dr. Time, in a deep exploration of an interdisciplinary exploration of time. We talk about time empathy and how we relate to time and how this influences our connections. We talk about the fresh start effect and how we can design time or our rhythm and cadence in a way that can support us in our well-being. And we talk about the ways that we might experience time in this time of COVID-19. And so be ready to enter the rabbit warren of time, a deep philosophical exploration, but also one that might bring hopefully some new questions, but also some insights that will help you navigate the time that is our life. Grab a tea, take a breath, notice the inhale, the exhale, and the space between. A moment in between moments. Here you are. You're listening to Spaces Between with your friend and host, L. Jeffrey. An open exploration into restoring connection in the 21st century in our personal lives, our relations, and our communities. What does it mean to live in relationship to the wholeness of who we are together? I'm not one for ads and am one for creating something beautiful with others, in this case, you. So if you enjoy our time together, I do invite you to subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, rate and leave a review for the show. And if you're feeling super generous and fueled and filled up by our conversations, you might even consider donating or soon joining my Patreon membership. Just visit www.spacesbetweenpodcast.com, where you'll also find show notes and other useful links and resources following these conversations. So this is it. Let's dive in. Eddie, let's kick it off. Thanks for taking the time.
Hey, bro. Good to connect again.
Yeah, lovely to connect. We've been, I suppose, dancing and swimming in similar circles for probably 6 years or so now.
Yeah, it's been a while.
And so it's been brilliant to, I suppose, both share in witnessing each other's journeys through time and how we've evolved, how our identities and our work in the world is moving and shaping. And we're going to really deep dive into time itself and time in the psyche and time in connection and relationship. But firstly, we were talking about the question of how are you now, but also just the notion that everyone is experiencing that question of how are you now very different in this time. And it's hard to have a conversation these days without mentioning COVID-19. And of course, it's incredibly important to contextualize the conversations we're about to have. So how are you in this time?
Yeah. I suppose a mixture of gratitude and kind of a civic duty to participate in the chaos. So let me explain. Gratitude in the sense that, like, I'm feeling so grateful that, like, I live in Australia and, you know, I've got some work. You know, a lot of people are suffering in Australia right now with 3 million people unemployed, and I have family and friends, and so that I'm so grateful for that, but I feel that kind of guilt because a lot of people are suffering and don't have that. And I kind of feel this, how are you? Like, I have this sense of like a civic duty to want to like participate and play my part in the chaos and the suffering that's like that we're seeing right now. So that's my how are you. It's a kind of strange, strange place to be in.
Yeah. And there's a sense of, well, I just feel it as, my experience of it is kind of an ambient anxiety. I've really noticed it in my sleep in the last week, especially the last 5 days or 5 nights, sleeping heavily and then waking up at like 4 a.m. and just not being able to fall back asleep again, which is a very unusual pattern.
Me too, man. Yeah. Me too. I've been getting like crazy dreams. Last night, not last night, this morning, 5 o'clock. Dude, I woke up screaming F you.
Wow.
I woke up and went, fuck yeah. What?
Wow. Definitely a lot of unprocessed. I've been reading a lot of Freud at the moment as well. And Yeah, I just sense there is so much suppressed or unprocessed or just remnants from our history that is now coming to the surface. And possibly because we're in this kind of collective liminal zone, and also maybe because for some of us, maybe we're also more rested than we have been for quite some time because we've got this space now. And so, you know, when you've got enough sleep, you're going to dream. And so we're now dreaming more, which I think is incredibly healthy emotionally for all the processing taking place.
Yeah. And you know, I think that like people, this whole self-isolation, it's like kind of forcing people to be in like a monastic kind of style of living, you know, and that's scary for a lot of people. But like when you're in the monastic kind of style, of course your brain and body might be a bit more chill. And of course you're going to might have different types of dreams. So
yeah.
I thought to myself the other day, like, what are all the unexpected random things that are going to happen out of this period? I'm like, what if like a new monastic class emerged? You know, because everyone's had their own private monastery. I was like, because there's just going to be weird things that are going to happen, right?
Yeah, I just love this morning actually going for my morning walk around the block. Just the little quirky things that people are starting to do, like bringing their couches out now onto the nature strip, just so they can sit outside and watch people wander by and just little things like that. It's so good. And seeing people taking the time. Yesterday, an old lady just very diligently and intentionally and with so much presence, it seemed, painting the numbers on her letterbox. Just taking time to do all these little things. So beautiful.
I saw, was it last week? I was walking down the beach and these two horses just like were there, horse riders, you know, they're kind of like walking on the road. And I just, it's like, you know, because they often, technology is, and especially automobiles and transport, like that's how we often mark different eras, you know, like horses to cars. And so to see this kind of old time transportation system, it was like, what is it? Has time reverted back again? You know, it was kind of like a glitch in my matrix, you know?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I suppose to note for listeners that Eddie and I were talking before about time dilation and time warping. And of course, a lot of our conversation is going to be around time and relationship and connection and perception. And so this conversation is going to be an experience of hopefully a kind of time warp. So there will be tangents. There will be little wisdom bombs and things. It's going to be very emergent. And we're going to hope for it to be an experience of a kind of dialogue where time itself warps while we explore what time itself might be.
And a shared presence.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a shared presence and a kind of time travel machine that you and I are entering.
Yeah.
And
wee.
Yeah.
So to build context, we build context around ourselves in this time, but to build context around yourself. So Eddie, Dr. Time, and how have you traveled through time, to arrive at this, I suppose, curiosity and fascination that you now have with time?
Yeah. Okay. You know, the art of trying to explain yourself authentically and not go into the pitch, you know, that's something I'm still sort of trying to learn, especially when you sort of, for anyone who goes down a like non-traditional path and you do so many things. I think, I don't know if any listeners relate to that, but that's sort of at this stage of my time, that's something I'm learning. So, So anyway, with that context, I'm such a context person. Yeah, so I'm Eddie. I work as a chronosopher, and a chronosopher is, chronosophy is this interdisciplinary study of time. And so that's, you know, my interest is time is a kind of like a mega theme, and time, there's a time thread in just about anything. You know, and so to looking at things from an interdisciplinary time thread, it just gives you like a very novel perspectives of how to see things. So that's kind of like the in my portfolio of work, that's probably the main thing that occupies my time. Before this, I worked in the kind of innovation tech trend scene. I worked at a corporate in this kind of prominent Silicon Valley-based tech think tank, and it's through that I got immersed to different online communities. And to sort of cut to the essence of it, I came across a certain community that were kind of allowing learning in a different way. Allowing a learning where you could just explore a question that that normal society with its need to like provide clear outcomes, doesn't normally allow. And I very emergently got interested in what is time. And the motivation behind that was, I read guys like Buckminster Fuller, like maybe Carl Jung, and like these kind of like mega polymaths. And I was just feeling called to like focus in on one thing, like a craftsperson, one thing and do one thing well. That was like kind of my pull. And I didn't really know what subject I wanted it to be, but that was kind of the scholar in me wanted to do that. And yeah, when time emerged, that kind of was like, holy shit, this is like a specialty thing, which makes me feel it's very alignment, but it's also a generalist platform too. And like having that together was just felt very alive to me, because in my work as a tech trends researcher, you just dabble in like so many different fields and topics, and that's kind of interesting. And like, the rise of the generalist. But yeah, to have those two things. So that's a kind of long answer, but yeah, time itself, look, I'm still in the journey and I'm still discovering things of why I'm into it. But I suppose it's really ecstatic to discover like a kind of a sensing of the world that like emerged through you and through your research. So being able to sense time, it's like another sense that I have, and it's really exciting. It's like when you become a meditator or you become a sports person, like a basketball. How basketball people talk about basketball IQ. What is that? It's a real deep kind of
like sensing of
basketball. Yeah, but it's hard to explain if you're not a basketballer what that is. Yeah. So in the same way, it's just through this research, through chatting with hundreds of people, through like reflecting, it's like I've got this sense, and there's this overwhelming urge I have to share that with others, because like having some kind of sense of time, maybe you don't need to do it as nerdy as me, but having a sense of time can really benefit your life.
Yeah. So let's see if we can, I suppose, impart some of those, when you say it's hard to communicate it to others. Yeah, I'm curious how you, like your felt sense of time, if someone was to ask you, how do you perceive or how do you relate to time? Yeah, how do you, I suppose, communicate that to somebody who may not have gone down this rabbit hole before?
Yeah, so I always start like, so the question, the puzzle is actually in the question itself. So let me explain. When people say, what is time? I often say that's the wrong question. It's actually, what are the times? It's actually a plural. It's not one singular thing. So there are like hundreds of times going off everywhere around us. So think of like, systems thinking. When you see the world as systems, you know that like everything's interconnected. You know that the tree is its own system that's kind of moving with the sky system, and like there's just complexity all around you. So in the same way, like I see the complexity of time that is everywhere. So like, I don't know, for example, you have your own timeline, and I have my own timeline. And your timeline and my timeline is like kind of having a time travel experience. And that's just one tiny thing. It's like, oh, wow, cool. Here's another type of time that's emerging. Or you could like look up in the sky and, you see the cloud time, interacting on the ground, and people are having this experience of COVID-19 time. So it's just then everything to me is interesting. and everything has a time element to it. So
yeah, lovely. Would you relate to it? Because for me, it's very much the same I feel like we're very similar in that we are very wide-minded. And so we're curious about many, many things. And that for me has led to many challenges around the question of like, so what do you do? Like, well, I don't fucking know. I'm still working it out, but I'm curious about these things. I'm curious about relationships. I'm curious about the psyche, and I'm curious about community and congruence of people. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I'm curious about connection and relationship, and that's pretty core. And that shows up in many, many ways. And it also means that then for me, the question about, or the way of perceiving and noticing relationship and noticing connections in my everyday life, that's a spiritual practice. And there are connections on so many scales, micro and macro, and forever evolving. And so, which is why I love haikus, because it's an invitation to notice connection. And in a similar way, it sounds like that's kind of the same for you. It's actually the noticing.
Yeah, dude. Like, and I can hear that, you've developed your own sensing of like patterns and nuance, and like it's sort of like you're kind of seeing it evolve, connection, and it's your kind of unique galactic kind of noticing.
Galactic noticing. Oh, I'm going to have to take notes of all of these.
Dialogue. Galactic noticing.
Yeah. So time then and change how do you relate to, I suppose, time and change? How are they related? And do we is our perception of time related to also our perception of change around us? Thinking about COVID-19, and change all of a sudden is very much here. And with rapid change becomes an acute kind of anxiety. Will that impact our perception of time? Will time go quicker? Or like, is there in your, I suppose, contemplation, self-reflection, and also research, the relationship between time and change? Are they correlated in some way?
I haven't contemplated the exact word of change, but I'm going to riff in the moment, okay?
Do it.
And just to see what appears. So this is just a thought inquiry. So maybe what COVID-19 has represented or is showing us is like maybe our structures give us an illusion of lack of change. That's actually like the world is always changing. That's every Buddhist text talks about like change is the nature of reality, and reality and time are the same thing. So maybe like with all this chaos, we've been forced to like kind of maybe reckon with the change that was always at play. Like with climate change stuff, it's like people not understanding that change is actually happening really quickly, because we live in this kind of box time, like we live in calendar time and clock time. And that kind of, it gives the illusion of things not changing,
Yeah.
It's like,
it's a false
April,
sense of,
May.
Yeah.
A false sense of things not changing.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So maybe that's what's happening.
Yeah. So then how, in the path of maybe one returning to a more natural clock or their own or nature's sense of time, what are some of the things that you've done and maybe then could be invitations for others who are curious about exploring their own practice and perception of time? How have you played with time in your own life and ritual and practice?
So many things. Many things.
Yeah.
So, when you're a time guy, sometimes people assume that you optimize your time all the time and you're like, constantly just awesome with time. That's definitely not the case with me. The reason why I probably got into time is I probably have the most time angst out of anyone,
Yeah.
And, like one thing for me is just understanding that, in the same way that life is hard, like a relationship with time is difficult because it's complicated, and you're always going to sometimes feel like really good about your time, and then other times you're not, And so I guess I'm a little bit more accepting of that. And yes, I just want, I mean, that's kind of one, I don't know, something that I invite listeners to just think about. Like, you don't have to, yes, you know, you want to be optimized with time. And I love some of the, you know, those kind of Tim Harris hacker types that talk about, you know, monitoring your time. And like, that's kind of useful in a work context, but you don't want to do that in like a nature context, right?
No.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to think. I've got like 3 things on mine. What's the question again? Like, I'm going to look at my page sheet for a sec.
Yeah.
I just wrote some.
Like your practice of relating to time. So how in your personal life have you changed the way that you relate to time? Is there a way that you structure your days or not? Is there alarm clocks? Like, do you not have watches? What are some, I suppose, counterintuitive or ways that maybe people wouldn't even consider that you've played with and altered your relationship to time?
Yeah, okay. So one thing I do is every month I do a ritual, a transition ritual. And I do that to create a sense of like chapters between each month, not just like kind of Feb, March, but really like when you chapterify your life, you feel like you're kind of in a story. And when you're in like your own story time, that just makes life feel very alive. So in time psychology, they talk about this idea called the fresh start effect. So, you know, the most common examples when we do, you know, when yearly time changes, we all know that fresh start effect. When it becomes 2019 to 2020, it really feels like a fresh start. You know, like you can really feel it, right? Like a new beginning is happening. And so knowing that that psychological thing can happen, my whole thing is like, how can I like provoke fresh starts within me all the time? You know? And so with the monthly thing, I do this little ritual where I kind of write down what I was grateful for this last month. And then just on the first day, I just call it like my no time space. And I'll just like, you know, just focus on like a past perspective, which is like gathering what I learned about March and then doing intention setting for April. And that kind of creates a fresh start effect. Yeah. Or like on a daily level, like if I have a shit day yesterday, you know, it's okay. Tomorrow is a new day and I can do the fresh start. It really is a fresh start. So that's kind of one hack that's helped me.
And it's kind of like you're in taking that pocket of time to check in and to chapterify your life. You are also then actively choosing to opt into the next chapter. Like you're choosing how and who you want to be when you opt into the next chapter, rather than living at whim and just kind of allowing the next chapter to roll over you and not having that sacred pause. But then you are very actively.
And the chapter might be the chapter might be really similar, but it is creating a kind of newness, you know? Yeah. Like, dude, even us connecting, like I was like, okay, it's April. I got to just try something new. Right? I need to try new. So I did this unsettled thing. Yeah. You know, I was just like, okay, I'm just going to try it. And here we are talking, right? So like a fresh start can really shape your life because you just give your mind permission to do novel things, you know? Yeah. And I think, I mean, I guess, you know what? That's a real effect that can happen when the fresh start effect. You just think novelty, you know, because I mean, I've seen research that says like, you know, there's a peak, right? Like you'll have your New Year's resolution, you know, and your novelty might go for like Jan, Feb, March, but you just kind of go back into normality. And I do this every single year. Like I wish I could have hacked that. But I'm aware that pattern is common to many people. You know? And so I'm like, okay, if my time practice is lifelong, okay, let's just fresh start effect. Let's try that. So that's one thing I do. That's one thing I do.
And I'm curious for the monthly check-ins, because I do the monthly as well. And I've just started, instead of timing it at the end of kind of the Gregorian calendar month, I now pair it with the moon cycle.
Yes. And I know people who do that too. Yeah.
Because it's something really powerful about feeling that natural connection and connection to a natural phenomenon that is larger than oneself. So do your rituals and I suppose your rhythm and cadence, is it connected to the Gregorian calendar, or have you found your own rhythm? Or
I found my own. Maybe I've used the Gregorian calendar a little bit, because it's sort of hard to fully detach yourself from the Gregorian calendar. It's easy to say that, like if you're in nature all the time, the reason why you feel better when you go camping in nature is because like you're in a space and you do sort of sync up with nature time. But because we live in this society and the Gregorian is the predominant operating system, it's sort of I find a little bit hard. So I'm like, okay, let me just use that. And I just call it like, what's the next horizon? So I just have my own like creative calendar that is just hijacking the Gregorian. But that's how I do it.
And so the next horizon for you would be the next month, so to speak?
Yeah, the next horizon is next.
So you create your own kind of linguistics around it.
Sure, yeah. And I'm always trying, like my friend Chris helped me out in Jan, and like, he's very diligent, he's a CEO, so he's kind of brings that kind of strategic planning, which I sometimes don't have. And like, he did like he showed me his process, which is like, what's 4 years? Take those 4 years, break them down into 12 months. 12 months, what's quarter? And like, I really like that engineering kind of side of things. So I'm trying to pull that in again. And like he has that time plan, and that's like, I like that.
And I suppose it's a real balance between like a very masculine approach of structuring time, which I used to have my habit journal and my daily check-in at night, my weekly check-in, my monthly, my yearly ritual.
I did that too.
And then I swung to the other side. I'm like, fuck it, this is too hard. And the act of trying to be productive in this way is unproductive within itself. And so
I'm similar to you. I'd probably be on the more feminine aspect of things, but like in this kind of messy space of trying to like integrate the two. But
But then it's really like it becomes this quite pronounced act of really listening to oneself, because there are so many, like the bullet journal method, so many methods now at how to be productive and etc. And they're trying to, I suppose, merge the two, where there is space for fluidity and spontaneity, but there's also enough structure for you to get shit done. But is there any, I suppose, insights drawn from your experiences to how one can navigate those two poles of trying to have enough structure that they don't just lose themselves with the wind?
It's hard.
Yeah.
I want to plug 3 things in relation to that.
Yeah.
So one, the blog Extraordinary Routines by Madeline Dory. She's an Australian. Her work is fantastic.
Right.
Her work is fantastic. And we've chatted a few times on Instagram and stuff. And like our time philosophies are very aligned. She advocates a kind of gentler kind of form of time. So if you want to look into details about like just more kind ways that you can connect with your routines and rituals and that kind of thing, I recommend having a look at her stuff. And 2 resources that I wanted to share with you guys and hacks that I use is one, a platform called Focus at Will. And it's this music made by like these neuro musicians and scientists. And seriously, I promise you, you listen to the music and you will focus.
Wow.
It just like, it blows my mind. It's kind of like, I feel bad I haven't told more people about it.
Yeah. It's a competitive advantage.
It's so good, man. It helps me because I got ADD brain, man. Like I have too much divergent thinking patterning. So like I just listen to the music and it helps me focus.
Is it similar to another one I use is Brain FM? Have you heard Brain FM?
Yeah, similar. Yeah, very similar. But like I think there is a lot of, let's say, a mental scaffolding through digital that can help you focus, like backed by science. So you might as well use that to enhance your time, And then the third thing, which I found earlier this year accidentally, and it's actually been really powerful. So it's called FocusMate, and it's this beautiful product. Basically, it's like chat roulette, and it hooks you up with random people, and you do a sprint session, a 50-minute sprint session of work. So you just you go on your calendar, pick some times, and someone will rock up and he'll just say, hey, what are you working on? What are you working on? And then you just get to work and you do 50-minute sprint sessions.
Great.
And you know what? The time pressure, the social time pressure, as someone who like works alone a lot, like I will get work done. You know, and even if I don't get my work done, having that ritual of knowing I just have to rock up, you know.
So you schedule.
Like, I just schedule it, you know, and I just go, okay, I got to do, you know, I put it in my diary. I've got to do 1, focus mate, and 2, focus at will, you know, and it doesn't, like it's there. Like I just follow it. And even if I don't get everything done, like it's still.
You've likely got more done than you would have otherwise.
I've got more done, and I kind of, it's satisfying to know that you utilized your time. I mean, that's a male masculine thing, right? But we got to have a balance. Yeah. And one thing I wanted to share that I've only done the last few days, which has actually been really cool to see the time perception difference, is writing what I'm going to do the next day, the night before, on my phone, just like envisioning it. Like, I'm going to do this, I want these kind of experience. And what it does, it allows the mind to imagine overnight. And then I have like a map for the day ahead. Yeah. So I don't have to think about like what I'm going to do today. I've already done that yesterday. Of course, the map's going to change, but I don't have to wake up in the morning. Like, I mean, people do that with calendars and stuff, right? But I'm talking like more just fun details. Like, I'm going to go for a walk, think about this. So like,
so more like maybe playful characteristics or values that you'd like to inhabit the next day or something.
Exactly. You're using your frontal imagination brain the night before because, you know, we only have so much willpower in our brain. I don't know the science about it, but like you can't exert that much willpower all the time. So that just sort of.
And in the morning of the next day when you're scattered, and I find with myself, if I'm trying to plan my day out, but from the morning, I end up in this kind of existential loop, actually.
Exactly.
Yeah. And because especially the nature of our work is highly complex, to conceptualize it takes a lot of cognitive ability. Exactly. And so to do that in the morning, no, I need to know what I'm waking up for.
Exactly. And like to hold chief creative officer brain and chief operating officer brain at the same time in the morning when you just woke up, and you looked on your email the first thing you did in the morning. So like everyone does.
Best not to though. Handy tip.
Best not to. And I'm practicing the deep work thing and trying, but like
that's another one that we should definitely mention. Deep work.
Yes.
Very focused time. Instead of short amount of time, lots of activities, it's essentially long amount of time, fewer activities, and distraction-free working for those who haven't heard of it before. But it will be in the show notes. So I'm curious to dive more into, I suppose, the cultural aspects of time. And so to steer us away a little bit from the kind of time hacking and productivity aspect of time, my nerdy self is curious about, because I've seen online, you post a number of photos on Dr. Time, your alter ego Instagram page, which I'm also really curious to hear more about your alter ego and how that has come about and why that's useful to you. But that can be for a little bit later. How other cultures perceive time and how that influences, I suppose, their well-being, their creativity, the connection they experience in either their tribes or their clans. Yeah, what has just been some things that you find have been surprising and useful in, I suppose, informing your perception of time? What have been some other cultures' ways of perceiving and designing time that you've found useful to know about?
Yeah, okay. So a statement first. Every culture has a different relationship with past, present, and future. Okay, so that's some are more past orientated, some are more future, some are more present orientated. So research has indicated that when you're near the equator and there's more tropics, you actually tend to be more present orientated.
Right.
Because in Spanish, mañana, it's like it's all good. This is great. So every culture has a different. Let's call it like a time stamp. Okay. one of the first sort of insights I had in my journey, or not an insight, but realizing that I'd been thinking about this a long time to my own personal experience. So I'm Japanese American, and they both have a very kind of different relationship with time. So, the American culture tends to be very future orientated. They have a sort of a bit of a bias towards that. The American dream. A dream is like a future orientated concept. Like, where are you going? Success. Like, there's a reason why a lot of these platforms like LinkedIn, emerged out of the US. Like, I often feel like there's a future bias somehow deeply, because the whole resume is a kind of story of the emerging future, right? Like, it doesn't take into account the messiness of the present. It's like the kind of the arrow of the future, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And, and I've lived in the States a few times. And so like, I'm always kind of, oh, wow, it's a very future orientated culture, where one thing I like about Japan is they kind of blend the two. The three, the past, present, and future. But I think because of their old history, the past perspective is more sort of kind of prominent, I suppose. So, you can walk in Japan and you'll see like a huge temple that's 600 years old next to a gambling place, And just to give you so mom is Japanese, dad's American, but dad's an American who's lived in Japan. And I have this joke with dad. Actually, I always joke to him about it. But what did I call it? Oh, yeah. So in Japanese, they have this term natsukashi, which means nostalgic, just means nostalgic. But Japanese will often use it very colloquially, and they'll say it all the time. Right? It's like, that's natsukashi, that's natsukashi. Where in our language, in English, like, you don't use nostalgic all the time. Like, you'll use it, but it's not part of like our common set of words, right? Japanese, everything is natsukashi, which what is natsukashi? It's like a kind of appreciation of the past. So I call my dad a natsukashi junkie. Like, and I kid around with him my whole life. He's obsessed with natsukashi. Yeah. So he'll do stupid shit. Like, he'll go for a walk around the block and like go to his old apartment and stand there and like reminisce. Yeah. I just I just laugh with him about it. But I share that because it's just an example of like, he's got this past orientation. And I think it's sort of partially perhaps been influenced by Japanese culture, but he's more of a past orientated sort of person. Whereas my mom, even though she's Japanese, she's very future orientated, future orientated. So, now I'm talking about human psychology, but the point being is that, every culture has a different past, future, and it's often by like the mythos of a country and how they make sense of the world. And
but I suppose it's almost more important because we can talk about cultures, and that's incredibly important in its own way as a way of gaining perspective or context, but not to place people into that too flippantly. So every person, no matter what culture they're from, will have their own individual orientation and timestamp.
Exactly. And so like, thinking that as a concept, like every culture has a past, present, future, and every person does. Yeah. And like, that sometimes can provide tension, like, so the monk, like a monk is very present orientated, but a monk might not find his place in New York City, where it's very fast time and very future, perhaps, whereas a monk in a time culture, like let's say, India, where, people are more present oriented. We shouldn't make a generalization, but you know what I mean? Like,
well, you have to be, otherwise you're going to step on cow shit. You're going to be hit by that bike, that car.
Exactly. And you
I
just got to be adaptable.
A constant flow state when I was in India. My mum's from India, and so I have quite a strong connection there as well. And whenever I've been back, every time, especially in main cities, so Kolkata or Delhi, I just feel catapulted into a flow state. And only when I get home at the end of a 12-hour day or whatever it is, am I able to actually recall what I've done for the day. Because if I dare stop for a moment and try and recall what I've done, I would be run over or called into this underground lair somewhere and just gone with it.
Exactly. I went to Varanasi, and like that place is beautiful chaos, and like you don't have time to think about the clock when you're walking around with like dead bodies everywhere and like ceremonies and stuff.
And so I suppose this leads on to the concept of time empathy, which we touched on offline earlier. And so, I'm curious, what was, for you, what is time empathy and why is it important? Obviously, this starts to then bring us to the conversation of how does our perception of time and others' perception of time, how do they meet in the middle, and how does this either enhance relationship or deter from quality in relationship and connection?
Yeah. So, I mean, we've kind of been having a time empathetic conversation sort of anyway, but I think just time empathy is about, I don't know, firstly, this is kind of a term I'm just sort of playing with as a useful way. Part of my work is taking complex stuff about time and making it simple and in stories in a way that everyone can kind of play with it. So my attempt of like saying time empathy, I'm sort of at the moment just finding ways of integrating the term empathy and time. So to be time empathetic, just being aware that everyone has a complicated relationship with time and we're in complicated time contexts. So just being sensitive to that, So I have a friend who, he's often my example of a time empathetic person. He's always late, always late. Like we'll say meet up at this time and he'll just rock up sometimes like 20 minutes late, but I went to this point like, oh, this is interesting time empathy. Like, let's look at his situation, right? He obviously has more of a present orientated nature and he's juggling lots of different times. So he's got his work schedule, he's got his family schedule, and he travels around the country, So you're juggling airport time in your head.
Yeah.
Now, that's a lot to handle, That's a lot of stuff. Whereas pre-time empathy, look, people would just get pissed off that someone's late.
Yeah.
But to have time empathy is not that you need to accept if everyone's late, but because sometimes that might be like they're not respecting you. Like that's a whole nother thing. But just being aware that I don't know, we are all dealing with time. And could I read you a quote actually?
Sure. Yeah.
One of my favorite.
Love poetry. All of these. Speak to us in very different ways.
I want to read you a quote. I have this. I'm going to release it at some point. The last few months, I've kind of stopped it now, but like every night I would just collect quotes. And I collected like 300 epic quotes about time.
Wow.
And it took a while because I was just finding the gems.
Yeah.
I've technically called it the Clockbook Project. So I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but every quote I feel like, I think Jason Silva talks about this, but the reason why he loves quotes is they're kind of invocations, right?
Yeah.
Like the quotes provoke something within you. They're kind of potions of consciousness.
Yeah. Oof. I like that.
Yeah.
Potions.
Yeah. There you go. Dialogue, just random shit just emerges out of itself. Power of dialogue, man. Power of dialogue. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Hit us with this quote.
So this quote, I hope, might provoke, this invocation might provoke what it might feel like to be time empathetic. And it's a quote from a psychoanalysis social scientist, Canadian guy. I think, he's dead now. He was in the 60s and 70s. Named Elliot, I can't say it in a Quebec accent, but Elliot Jacozzi. And he's most famous for a term that we all know that we don't think someone did research, and he coined the term midlife crisis.
Right.
Now, that's part of common vernacular, right? And to notice midlife crisis, you got to be a good researcher about time. So this is a quote from him, and my favorite quote, one of many. The enigma of time, I'll put this in the show notes. The enigma of time is the enigma of life. It has plagued poets and philosophers from the beginning of civilized thought. For life is lived in time. Without time, there is no life, but each one lives in his or her own time. No two men/women living at the same time live at the same time. Each one living in the same moment has his own personal time perspective, his own living linkage with past and future, the content of which and the scale of which are different between one person and another as their appearance, their fingerprints, their characteristics, their desires, their very being. That different people live in different time scales or in a different temporal domain, as I shall refer, may not be so self-evident, yet it has profound and far-reaching consequences for everyone. For it is through the recognition of different time scales within people live, many of the mysteries of time can be resolved and time may be understood. So understand, living in different time scales, So I'm gonna actually, this is great. COVID-19 time scales. Everyone's time scales have been disrupted in some shape or form, but in particular, time scale, I think that's common from, we touched on this before, is that we don't know what the future is gonna hold. Like, we don't know. Everyone's like immediate future is kind of shaken, you know? So like that can cause a lot of stress. Yeah. And stress is how people manifest stress is really different. So like I could be stressed about the future, and that might affect why I'm an asshole. You know? But if you can go have time empathy and go, okay, I can safely say everyone is stressed about the future, and we all know stress, everyone reacts differently. So I'm going to be empathetic with people that they might be weird in the present.
Yes. And it could be like a great opportunity to practice coming back, or at least trying to sense or deepen our sensitivity to our own time scale, instead of relying on these outer structures of the calendar and so when I go to work, sometimes I come home, and all these things that are slowly falling apart, or have for many. And so we feel lost and lonely and maybe purposeless in the world. It's a great invitation to start to sense our own calendar. Start to listen for the impulse of, actually, now's dinner time. It's not 6 p.m. or now's lunchtime. It's not just when it's 12:30 p.m. To sense into our body's clock and our body's calendar. Yeah. And to become a little bit more intimate, I suppose, with life itself, as David White would put it. Do you feel then that...
And knowing like all these people, sometimes when you're stressed or people beat themselves up, they don't like know that how much weight they're carrying. Like, and once you sometimes can recognize, like, oh shit, I'm carrying a lot of weight, it can, you basically just go and give yourself a break. Yeah. Yeah. Your
body's telling you to,
and you're telling your mind, body, spirit, just give yourself a freaking break. Yeah. Right. So like a lot of people, this whole like work from home, everyone's going to work from home. What? Work from home? That doesn't like what that, you know what, that it's a surface level word that people are using, but people are coming, they have to do school life, maybe your partner's time and your work time and your computer time in like one bubble of time, your place. Like, this, I don't know, I'm really annoyed by the work from home thing, because it just sort of, it doesn't take into account how difficult it is. It's like, I mean, I'm single and I'm still finding it kind of an adjustment period. So like, it's hard, with kids, right? If you have kids, one of the things at school is like you delegate time schedules. Like their calendar is sort of the teacher does that, right? But if you're forced to now have your kids' calendar, feed them and stuff, that's just a lot of bandwidth. So
yeah. And to like just we're in such a time of an elevated mental health crisis. I mean, we were already well enough in it before coronavirus, and now we entered this biological health crisis where we need to isolate ourselves, which just amplified this mental health crisis. Where now we're inside. I think
that's why your work's important, man. Like connection, we need connection more than ever. And I mean, I keep thinking about this loneliness epidemic, dude.
Oh yeah. And I mean, in this time, I feel there's going to be, unfortunately, many more suicides. And this is just all my sense. And I'm going to be curious and hopefully not horrified to see the statistics afterwards.
It's inevitable. It's inevitable. It's isolation equals suicide. That's just like,
Yeah. And then also divorce. And then also babies.
And also baby. But I can't, this is the great dilemma, right? Like social isolation to save lives, knowing that isolation is the conditions to create bad mental health sometimes. Isolation is why men kill themselves, like
exactly.
In rural communities we hear all about that because they're isolated.
And there's this funny relationship with masculinity and vulnerability. But that's a whole nother conversation.
That's a whole nother kettle of fish.
I'm curious to come back to time empathy. Is it then, do you feel, a worthwhile and I suppose a great practice for one to consider doing to familiarize themselves with being having a past-oriented timestamp, present-oriented timestamp, and future-oriented timestamp? For someone who, like myself, I'd say most of my life, up until I was maybe 19, very future-oriented timestamp. Then had some great experiences of being very present-oriented. And since then have been somewhere in between the two, but I wouldn't say yet that I've fully experienced being a past-oriented being. And so my ability to empathize and have compassion for someone who is past-oriented is probably
Exactly. Spot on. You identified it. Resource for the listeners. Time psychology. The book's called The Time Paradox. It's a crappy survey, but it can give you a score of like your past, present, and future orientation. So in time psychology, the basic 101 of time psychology is healthy, self-actualized individuals tend to have a strong balance of past, present, and future orientation. That's what the research indicates. So, time psychologists will advocate that. They'll look at where your biases are and you do things to sort of balance that out.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first part of like being self-empathetic, understanding yourself. It's just like what you just did, understanding your own time makeup psychologically, and then knowing that everyone else has their own time makeup. So.
And is that, just to touch on, I suppose, more of your work at Temporal Labs, also working with teams and leadership groups in helping them, I suppose, conceptualize and understand how they can relate to time in a way that is more meaningful and more conducive to their reason for being? Is time empathy a big part of that? Or what would you say what are teams or groups what are the blind spots of teams or groups that are meaning that their relationship to time is actually unproductive?
Yeah, well, that's it. Like I think, team members, a good team syncs up together, right? Like they kind of develop their own intelligence, you could say. And a barrier to syncing up is trust, right? Trust is kind of human Wi-Fi. And to trust each other, you need to understand each other. It's like a very simple formula. And so understand each other's time is a way to build trust. Like, and then understanding like an organization's sense of time, Like I was part of one small firm, and a firm whose the trust we had with them kind of was broken. So they did this was many, many, many years ago. they did this like big strategic 5-year plan, right? So future orientated, like get everyone involved, everyone was psyched up. So you got buy-in to this shared future. And then something happened, and that future got thrown out the window, and a lot of people left. You know, so it's like, if you're gonna ask people to step into the future, you gotta allow them to participate in it, because, you know, my future is my life. So if you're asking team members to be in a shared future, like you're asking people to give their time, and like time is like so sacred, you know, it's the only resource that's non-renewable. So I think, you know, a lot of what I do is one thing that amazes me in my work is I just find like people have a sense of time. You just give them some basic concepts, and I'm blown away that people, it's like they're already sensing it, because we work with it all the time. So sometimes I feel like I don't have to do that much.
Yeah. Well, I think it's like the notion of time, we very rarely contemplate it. A lot of our relationship to time is pre-contemplative or pre-reflective. We don't reflect on time. It just is, but we all have a strong sense on it. And so I think you go.
Oh, well, the time is the most commonly used noun in the English language.
Right. Wow. Yeah.
So
we've never gone into the deep dive.
Well, if a word is a doorway, or like if a word is a kind of node of different terms, and if each term is like provokes a kind of concept or a term, like it's almost like the nugget of a term that can mean lots of terms, you know, that has association networks with everything. So like to contemplate time is a doorway to think about so many things. And it's just kind of like the opening of the matrix. Now, when you walk to the initial contemplation about time, I found like you could just go in a completely different context, because people are smart. People think about time. They just don't think of it explicitly like in the way I do, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I imagine it's, and this is possibly just an invitation for a listener, just to simply try and, well, not even try it, just to simply notice time. Pretty simply.
That's it.
Notice how time is moving. And in the same way that I find noticing connections really helps me connect and kind of rub up against life itself, noticing time, I imagine will have a very similar effect where you start to feel more intimate with your life.
It develops a meta consciousness of being aware of how you're being aware about time. It builds a temporal consciousness. You can just be aware of like, just, you know, I talked initially about the complexities of time that are everywhere. And it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to nerd out about it in the same way that I do, you know, although I highly recommend it. Just because it's joyful and it's exciting. But I just think just a little bit of like light thinking and just seeing how time is a feedback loop on your life that can give you an awareness, you know?
Yeah. So as we start to close, are there any other beautiful statements or quotes that you had on your board that would be nice kind of nuggets, those little wisdom bombs that we spoke about for people to carry away with them?
Firstly, just some more resources, because I just keep thinking about resources. These are two books I'm reading right now. So I share this to just say, like, this is the kind of, I don't know, like I'm always learning about time. So these are some of the things I'm geeking out on. So this is called Uncontained, Digital Disconnection and the Experience of Time.
Cool.
So this is a digital media studies professor from the University of Melbourne. And, you know, so obviously he thinks a lot about digital time. And he did an experiment where he went up on a container ship for 5 weeks and reflected on his lived experience of time.
Wow. So Uncontained. So that will be in the show notes. We have got plenty of time right at this moment. So let's sit down and contemplate time itself, I reckon. Yeah.
So it's an interesting, I haven't finished it yet, but it just highlights to me that every space can have an effect on your time. So that's sort of a nugget to think about. And this one, I went to Malaysia and I found this in the bookstore, but this is called Timefulness.
Ah.
How thinking like a geologist can help you save the world. So her kind of basic thesis is that we're not aware of the sort of larger temporal rhythms of our planet. Like we're not fully aware of how old a mountain is. You know, we're not connected with the depth of the trees. I often thought, like, imagine if you walked down the street and like you knew how old a tree was. Like if it said birth 19 whatever. Like it would just, and you do see that in some places, like in national parks. But if that was everywhere,
the reverence you'd feel for our environment.
Yeah, so like she says here, this is a nerdy term, but like, okay, so her name is Marius Forgen. I'm just going to read this little thing. This is from the sort of title thing, but she says here, okay, yeah, the author shows us how geologists can chart the planet's past, explaining how we can determine the pace of the solid Earth, such as mountain building or erosion, or comparing unstable rhythms between ocean and atmosphere. So all these types of parts of the planet operate on a different time, right? I mean, it's really obvious. These overlapping types of, she says here, overlapping types of change in the Earth system, some fast, some slow, develop a polytemporal worldview, or what she calls timefulness. So it's just being like kind of back to the point I said at the beginning, being aware that there's all these freaking times. So like, like the clouds operate at a certain time, the weather, but mountains are like on an old time scale, or like earthquakes, right? Earthquakes are kind of a buildup of pressure over a long period of time that boom. Yeah. So I'd share those two books. These are what I'm reading right now. So if you're interested, check it out. I'm going to read a quote. Who should I read? My favorite, I've got so many favorite quotes. This one. This is a Japanese guy named Yasunara Kawabata, Japanese novelist and short story writer. So touches on similar things we have spoken about. So cosmic time is the same for everyone, but human time differs with each person. Time flows in the same way for all human beings. Every human being flows through time in a different way.
Wow.
Simple quote, but just, you know.
We'll definitely put a couple of them in the show notes as well. It brings me, as I'm connecting it to a conversation I was having with a friend the other day. We're talking about the infidelity in our experiences, and that everyone's internal experience is so completely different to everyone else's. And therein lies our inherent loneliness. We will never actually feel the feeling of being experienced, because no one can experience what we're experiencing. And we also, if we think we know what someone is experiencing, we're a complete idiot, because no one can actually experience somebody else. Therefore, we're completely alone in the world.
Exactly. I've called that exquisite loneliness.
Because it's beautiful as well.
Like, it's beautiful. It's like we live in our own universe, our own internal universe, interacting with the shared universe, and that's ours and ours alone. And it's lonely to think about it. But then it also calls into
together. Yeah, and it doesn't mean we stop trying to connect. Not at all. It means, which is like the act of a therapist, is to try and get as close as we can to giving someone the experience of being experienced. To get as close as we can to touching their inner experience in a way, to cease that kind of loneliness, that they feel like they've been heard and felt or seen in a way that no one else had been present enough to just yet. And so it can relate that to time.
And maybe, you know what, I was going to say, maybe loneliness is like not being a stranger to your own original sort of sensing. Like you don't know your place, like what makes you lonely. Yeah. So it comes across as a negative loneliness rather than like an exquisite loneliness. Yeah. Which, like, to be the difference between being alone and being lonely, like to be alone and to be okay with that is to still feel like intimate with your surroundings. It doesn't have to be other people or humans as such. You can feel completely intimate with your ecology, with the chair, with the senses, like to be
it is that curiosity and that kind of living with the question for me that helps me feel at home in the world. There's a quote, said it once, but
love that.
For as long as we identify only with our humanity, we'll forever feel lonely. But when we start to identify with our ecology and with the world and life and maybe time passing through us itself, we'll never feel alone or lonely, I mean, because we start to identify with the greater tidal and seasonal rhythms of life that are actually animating us. There's some poetry.
Boom. Dialogue, baby, dialogue.
Great. Yeah. So, in coming to wrap it up into some form of, an invitation or something for those listening, what would you like to leave people with? Is it a question? Is it a quote? Something that you've found useful on your journey through and with time?
I'm going to speak to what's going on right now. And just maybe how's time feeling for you right now? That's basically, and I say that to just, and it might be complete chaos, but sometimes I think just observing what's bringing you tension in time is enough to ground yourself. It doesn't take it away, but just how does your time feel right now? Are you scared about the future? Are you not feeling present? What are you doing in the present? Procrastinating, or how's the news shaping you? Because is it so fast? How's your time feeling about right now? Because it is a unique historical time, and they said it's a one in a century kind of event. It's interesting how they time frame it like that. So just think about how time's affecting you in this day and age, and just start there, and that might give you a place to maybe some empowerment. So just a way of navigating this age, which is very hard. It's going to be very hard for many people.
Yeah. And in sitting with that question ourselves, also then extending that question in our relationship to others, knowing that other people are also experiencing time very, very differently now. And so how can we sit with another and be so totally open to them being pulled into past orientation or being propelled into future orientation? And no matter where they are, how can we meet them and honor where we
and I think useful if you're the personality psychological test type, it's useful just to know what your biases are with past, present, future. That's useful. That's always useful.
Yeah. And even posturally, I know, sitting in meditation, I used to lean forward in my posture a fair bit. And whether this is right or true or not, but the teacher that I was sitting with just cued that if you notice yourself leaning forward, start to ponder on whether you have future orientation. What does it feel like to sit centered? Or if you're slouching back, how is your posture reflective of your time orientation? Which I found curious.
Bro, that's interesting, because when I meditate, and I meditate 30 minutes a day, I often meditate the wall on my back, to keep my back straight.
Ooh.
So I don't know what that says about time.
And also, let's just plot it in there that maybe things don't have to mean anything.
Yeah, maybe.
But also that metacognitive exercise of noticing the, I suppose, the ways in which we behave and the ways in which we think. Just that reflective thought is useful.
Yeah, and meaning making, even if it's just BS, it's useful to just play with your thoughts, your thought kind of kaleidoscoping, just play, because it can give you interesting lenses to anything.
Yeah. So how can people connect with you or connect with your work and ask further questions if they'd like to reach out?
Yeah, so I recommend following me online. I've got a website, eddieharran.com, or we haven't even talked about Dr. Time, but I have an alter ego online presence, so it's just at Dr. Time _ on Twitter, or at Eddie Harran. So I use Twitter a lot, and I've got Instagram, Dr. Time as well. But if anyone who's listening to this immediately, kind of this time of year, April, I'm really kind of planning to step up my online presence in the next few months after kind of sort of being dormant for a while. So, you'll find me online.
Great. Awesome. Thank you for taking the time. Yeah. All right.
Good, great to chat.
Yeah, lovely to chat. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
What questions are still whirring inside for you? What landed and rung loudly for you? Let's take a moment. Thank you for joining me for another life-affirming and enriching conversation, each one a light, a torch to guide us on our path to being in right relationship with ourselves, those we walk with, and the ecologies we are very much a part of. I trust this has gifted you something to place in your toolkit to support you in your journey and your leadership. Make sure to connect with me and leave any comments on my Facebook or Instagram page at @ljeffrey, and check out the links in the show notes. This show is completely funded by listeners just like you, so if you feel generous and wish to be part of nourishing these inquiries that we're exploring together, you can leave a once-off donation or soon subscribe to my Patreon membership. Show notes, resources, and donations are all at www.spacesbetweenpodcast.com. Until next time, remember, we can't rush our way back. Notice connections and tend to the sweet, sweet spaces between. Lots of love.